Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We're looking at running this webinar for about 45 minutes. 30 minutes is dedicated to the presentation itself, and then we'll leave some room at the end for question and answers. With that being said, I highly encourage parents and students alike to drop their questions in a little Q&A, whether it's in the chat itself or the Q&A only box, and we'll make sure that we get to them. Tonight's webinar, oh, there's someone from Poland. Oh, that's exciting. Sorry, got sidetracked there. We'll make sure that you get a copy of tonight's webinar as it is recorded. We encourage you to send it to your friends, your family, other students, those in your network who could benefit from learning a little bit more about the SAT Math Deep Dive, which is the topic that we're here to discuss tonight. Before I hand it off to our wonderful presenters, a brief agenda, an introduction to our wonderful panelists. We'll be speaking about understanding the SAT math structure, questions, effective problem-solving strategies, tips and tricks, as well as that question and answer that we mentioned. So, Dominique and Michael, I'll let you take it from here. Michael, did you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm Michael Feinberg. I'm in Los Angeles, California. Right now, I'm finishing up my PhD in education at the University of Southern California. I have just about a month or two left. Before that, I was a high school math teacher for 5 years in the San Fernando Valley. And before that, I was a full-time SAT tutor, and I've continued to tutor the SAT and ACT for over 10 years now. So I've hopefully some wisdom to provide to you all.
Awesome. And hi, everyone. My name is Dominique. I am coming at you live from Chicago. I have worked in education since graduating from college. I graduated from Dartmouth College, and some of my background is in helping students, both as a high school math teacher myself through the SAT, AP testing, all of those fun things. I've worked as a private test prep tutor for the ACT, so kind of understand the similarities and differences there, if that's something anybody has questions about. And I work with foundation learning as kind of a college counselor. And so I help, this is obviously one piece of that. I help students like you all kind of figure out how to piece all these things together, test prep, your story, your personal narrative, your grades, all of that into a really hopefully shining package to send over to colleges. So I'm excited to be here tonight and get started. I will actually just jump right in and start, and then we'll go back and forth. Michael, feel free to jump in if there's anything I miss, of course. I think that the first thing to consider when we're talking about the SAT and specifically the math section is just the structure. What can you expect? How many questions? What does this look like? And so on this next slide, you'll see the digital SAT math section has 44 total questions. I'm making sure to say digital because this is relatively new. The SAT has shifted from a regular kind of paper and pencil test where you're bubbling in answers. I'm sure you've all taken a test like that, to one that you're taking in a digital format on a computer. So it is actually split up into two 35-minute modules, and it features both multiple choice and answers where you'll need to literally come up with a number and fill it in yourself. The two modules is slightly different. So I see that there's some seniors here. If you have potentially taken the SAT in the past, you may be familiar with the calculator and no calculator section. That is now gone. So you can actually use a calculator on the entirety of the test. So it's no longer split up into calculator, no calculator. What is kind of interesting and unique about this is that how you do on that first module will dictate what you get on the second module. And this is called an adaptive test. If you've heard of an adaptive test before, it basically says, oh, you really struggled with this. I'm going to give you something a little bit easier for the next module, or you did super, super well. We're going to challenge you a little bit. This can mean a lot of things for the testing experience. And so if you do super well on that first part, and then all of a sudden you're getting hit with all these really hard questions, don't panic. It must mean that you did pretty well. On the other hand, if you do get some easier questions, also don't panic. I don't want you to sit there and think, oh, I didn't do so well. maybe you did miss quite a few on the first part, but then you have a chance to have these really kind of attainable questions where you can make up some points because they're likely ones that you are able to grasp and get a little bit easier. Scores are the same as before. So again, if anyone was familiar, they range from 200 to 800. Each question is actually not worth the same amount anymore. That's a slight typo. And so that's really important to just clarify with everybody. Because the test is adaptive like this, that wouldn't make a ton of sense. And so the questions are weighted slightly differently based on how hard they are. Just like before, though, there is no penalty for guessing. And so definitely make sure you are timing yourself well. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the strategy section. But make sure you save enough time to at least try each of the questions. That way you can get as many points as possible. I think that's everything I have here. I don't know, Michael, if you have anything to add.
I saw just in the Q&A a question about our thoughts on the shift to digital, which we can talk more about later, but I think it's overdue. Grad level tests, the GMAT in particular, has always used this kind of scoring where it rises to the level. So what makes it adaptive is, like Dominique was saying, you get all the hard ones right, they keep getting harder. So it's kind of, if you're doing it correctly, the questions are always going to feel challenging but doable. You're never going to hit a stretch where you like have 5 in a row that just feels super hard, because if you start missing those, they're going to make them a little easier again. So the questions always kind of feel tough but doable is if you're doing this properly. So let's talk about the types of questions that are on the new digital SAT. So some of this, I think the way this is categorized is a little bit more for the paper tests, but these types of questions do still show up. So we got our different kinds of algebra questions ranging all the way from pre-algebra, which is the stuff that students maybe haven't even tackled since 6th or 7th grade, all the way up to intermediate and some honestly pretty advanced algebra, which is stuff they may be actively learning in 11th grade in Algebra 2 and in trigonometry classes. So some pre-algebra stuff, really basic operations, even stuff that's almost arithmetic, factoring, some fractions, elementary algebra, things just like basic equations, linear inequalities, things that you would do in an Algebra 1 course. And then intermediate algebra gets up to stuff you're going to see in an Algebra 2 class, systems of equations, quadratics, rational expressions. The complement to that is the geometry stuff. So there's two kinds. There's coordinate and plane geometry. Coordinate is about graphing and slopes, things like that are things you would tackle in Algebra 1 and geometry class. Plane geometry is the types of thing you would see in geometry and to a lesser extent Algebra 2 classes, things about completing the angles of a triangle or of a shape, finding the area of a triangle or quadrilateral or a circle, volume calculations, so things that are a little bit more advanced concepts. There's a few trig questions. It's not a huge part of the test. Some students will not even take trig before they take the SAT, and that doesn't mean you're not going to do well. But it is a part of the test. And then what's newer for the digital SAT is data analysis. So I was personally a statistics teacher. That was my main focus. And this is becoming a bigger part of the test. So reading graphs such as scatter plots and two-way tables, probability questions are starting to make their way in, and evaluating statistical claims. So if you're thinking about what to take down the line, just from a former stats teacher, stats might be a good class to take, just as something to give you a little bit more comfortability with these kinds of questions, because they don't tend to show up in your typical math curriculum that goes from Algebra 1 up to calculus.
I'll just jump in here really quick too. I think one thing that I see, especially with some of the younger students that I work with, they're coming in, potentially you are a student that is a little bit more advanced, and say you've taken pre-calculus or calculus by the time you're in 10th, 11th grade. There is no reason why you can't take this test early, or early being, I guess we haven't really talked fully about the exact dates that make sense, but usually students will take the official SAT in the spring of their junior year and then potentially retry it in the summer and in the fall. There's no reason why you can't take this as a 10th grader or in the fall of your junior year or whatever it may be. And I just think that's important to mention, because if you look at this, none of this really goes beyond Algebra 2, trigonometry. There's no pre-calculus, there's no calculus. It's none of those super, super high level concepts. And so if you are a student that's a little bit ahead of the kind of traditional path in your math pathway, it may benefit you to take it a little bit sooner. That way you're not kind of out of the game for a while with all of these concepts and then having to almost relearn them because they're not fresh in your mind. And so just something to consider when we think about the types of questions offered.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That is one of the more common things I see with my really advanced juniors when I tutor them is they have been doing calculus all day. And then I ask them to find a slope or find the area of a circle. And they're like, I honestly have no idea how to do that because I haven't found an area of a circle in 3 or 4 years, which doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it's not top of mind. So sometimes there's kind of a sweet spot before you get too far past these more elementary concepts where taking the test, you remember what you just did, but you're not so far into the advanced stuff that you're going to forget that.
All right, awesome. I'll jump back in. We can talk about problem solving strategies that you can use kind of while you're taking the test. Most of these are pretty much consistent. So if you were kind of preparing for maybe the paper and pencil SAT or have taken it and now you're kind of transitioning over because things are a little bit different now, most of these strategies can be used in either way. I think a big thing here that, and again, I will just kind of to give a little bit of context from my experience working with students on the ACT, the SAT is a little bit more tricky in the way the questions are worded. And so if you are the type of student that really just would rather kind of see a question and it's like, solve this equation, you go solve it, and that's it. The ACT is a little bit more straightforward in that way. The SAT is really, I hear a lot of people say it's almost like the math section is like reading test number 2, where you really have to be super careful about reading and figuring out exactly what it's asking you for. It's almost that's like half the battle is figuring out like what do they want from me, and then doing the actual math is the easy part. And so step number 1 for just kind of problem solving and strategies is just really carefully read the question. Make sure you're paying super close attention to that key information, pulling it out if you need to take notes on it or whatever it may be. And then again, focus on the answer. Really ask yourself, what am I being asked to give them? Oftentimes there's an example here, right? Oftentimes you're used to being told, solve for X, solve this equation. Sometimes they might, it might not just be a number. It might be like an expression like this or something like that. And so that kind of gets at preview the answers as well before you're even going in and like really doing a ton of thinking and work on this, because the answer may be in a different format than even what you're expecting.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most common mistakes I see where, this is especially like a higher ability student mistake where you're used to just firing off answers, just like get the answer, move on. And you have to slow yourself down, which can be tough if you're a quick worker, to really just take a breath and say, what do they want from me? That's the first thing before you start solving. Don't just start going, read first. All right, let's start to the next one. So an important thing when you do the SAT is to make sure you're choosing the right approach. So there's a lot of different ways to answer a question. This is not, math always has multiple ways to answer questions usually. But typically, if you're in school, there's one your teacher wants you to do, or there's kind of one way you're practicing. The SAT, there's usually a lot of different ways you could answer the question reasonably. So you want to make sure you're using the right tool for whatever the question has. So that could be something like using process of elimination for the multiple choice questions. It could be just literally plugging in answers. Like you don't have to know the concept and the exact strategy to use. Sometimes you can literally just plug in A, B, C, and D into the answer until the right one pops out. Or you can try to simplify problems, break them down into a piece where you're like, okay, I don't remember how to do the factoring part, but I remember how to graph this. So let me try to graph this part and see if I can get a little bit closer, at least get to a guess. So unlike math class, they're not grading you on your process. They're not like, wow, you did such an amazing job, but you got the answer wrong, so here's 3/4 of a point. They're going to say you get the point for right or you lose the point for wrong. So the person who, guess and checks their way to the right answer is going to get a better score than someone who is doing the brilliant math student way of doing it, but ends up with the wrong answer. So unfortunately, as a math teacher, it hurts to say this, but the process doesn't really matter. It's the getting the right answer that gets you the point.
Awesome. And so here's another approach. And this is something that I think a lot of students are afraid of because you're being told, I was also a math teacher. And so this also is like, oh, I really want you to understand this, and, show me that you understand this, and all those things. But sometimes at the end of the day, plug and chug really is the best strategy here. And so, if you feel like you are even sitting there for more than like 20 seconds of feeling a little bit lost, you've got to make that split decision. And this is where practice comes into play, right? Do as much timed practice as you can. Wake up in the morning. It's 7 a.m. I'm going to wake up and I'm going to pretend I'm in the testing room. I'm going to log in and do some time practice. I'm going to turn my phone off and just make sure I'm focused. That way you can like put yourself in that situation. Okay, it's been 15, 20, 25 seconds. I need to pivot. What am I going to do? Right. So just practice making those split-second decisions as to how you want to approach these problems. And then that'll just be that much easier by the time you get to the testing room. Another thing I'll say is I think this slightly kind of goes along with this slide. The new calculator policy. I think a lot of students are like, awesome, I don't have to worry about doing mental math or, doing math on paper, whatever. Yes, but that can come at a cost as well, right? Sometimes doing it in your head is quicker or even more reliable, because you can easily make a quick mistake punching things into your calculator, especially if you're doing a ton of work in your calculator. If you do have some basic mental math skills, or, if you're doing it out on paper and showing your work, it's going to be a lot easier to make sure you're not making mistakes than if you're just punching, a bunch of different expressions and, different things into your calculator. And so be careful with that. And if you plan on using your calculator often, practice with your calculator. Don't just say, oh, great, I have my calculator, I'll rely on it. If you really do feel like you'll use it a lot, make sure that you're also building that into your practice. There's various different types of calculators that are allowed. I would highly recommend you practice with the one you plan on using. You can bring most graphing calculators, scientific calculators. There's also now, as part of the digital one, they will provide you one that's, if you've ever used the program Desmos in any of your classes, it's through that. And so if you don't have a calculator, Desmos is awesome, but familiarize yourself with it before you just jump in and try to learn Desmos on test day.
Yeah, I think that's the calculator thing you just said is perfect. In the classroom when I was teaching, I can't tell you how often a student would come to me at the end of a test and say, oh yeah, I did the stats on this and I got 18 quintillion% as my answer. Well, it's like, obviously that's wrong. So the calculator is to help you. The calculator can't think for you. The calculator is not going to do the problem for you. The calculator is an assistant to make sure you don't have to do super advanced arithmetic and things like that and graphing. So make sure that you are using the calculator and that the calculator is not taking the test for you, because it's not going to work. So one thing that's really important, and again, this goes back to taking the test. On that last slide, one way to think about guess and check is kind of a lazy way to do math. That's not the way you would do it in math class. Like, the diligent math student learns the method, practices it, does the process in its completion, shows all their work. The SAT, you don't have time for that. You have about 90 seconds per question at most. So sometimes you don't have time to do 10, 12 steps to get to the right answer. You have to be a little bit lazier. And one way to do that is by eliminating answer choices. Most SAT math questions, especially ones that I would rank as medium or easy, there's going to be at least one answer that just really cannot possibly be right. So going back to that example, it's a stats question. If you see the probability that's less than 0 or greater than 1, that can't be the answer. Probabilities have to be between 0% and 100%. So if you see answers that cannot possibly be right away, they should be eliminated. So this goes back to reading what they give you before you just start solving the problem. Because what you might find is, just by elimination, you can get to 50-50 or 1 in 3 immediately. And once in a while, if you're lucky and you do elimination well, you might get the right answer without having to really solve the problem at all. Because just by elimination, 3 of the 4 answers are going to disappear. So this is an especially useful tactic when you don't know how to do the problem. Very few people know how to do every single question, especially adaptive now, where it gets harder and harder. If you don't know how to do it, start looking at the answers, see which ones don't make sense or you don't think fit what you were expecting the answer to look like, and start eliminating. And even if that doesn't get you all the way there, worst case, 50-50 guess, you do a few questions like that, you're going to get half of them right. So save that time for a question that you actually are going to know how to do.
Yeah, I also just to jump in, I think I would echo just the don't freak out if you don't know how to do the answer. This is a new test. Like, you are not supposed to necessarily know how to do every single question. If you do, then you're doing amazing, right? If you don't, you can still come out of there with a really solid score. It's just a slightly different kind of model, right? Where like, it's literally designed to challenge you. And so if you do well, it's going to say, great, let me give you 1 extra here. Right. And so just kind of like go into it with that mindset. Because last thing I would want is for you to just crush it, get a harder set of questions because you did amazing, and then kind of freak out and be like, oh my God, why is this so hard? I must be doing terribly. And then just like the mental piece gets to you. That is just such a crucial component of all of this. And so really, again, practice makes perfect with that too, just really being able to wrap your mind around kind of the mindset piece. Awesome. Okay. So we will go to the last strategy that we'll be discussing today. And then of course Q&A, there'll be plenty of time to talk about all the other little things that we maybe don't get to. Time management, huge. I've said it, I think twice in the last 10 minutes. I'll say it again. Practice, develop a pacing strategy, make sure that you have time to at least try all of the questions. Even though the test is digital, you can still skip around. And so you don't have to necessarily do them in order. You can be like, oh, great, I don't know this, I'll come back to it. Don't be afraid to do that. Spend no more than 1.5 minutes on each question. You can absolutely skip them, come back to tougher questions. When I was working as a tutor, it kind of, varies student by student. We would come up with different strategies that kind of made sense for them as far as, okay, 20 seconds are going to go by. And if you feel like you don't know, then, plug and chug or whatever, whatever the kind of thing that works for you is. And so would highly recommend, again, you either practice or work with a tutor or both to really figure out, okay, on test day, here's my game plan. Here's my strategy for when I encounter this type of problem, or it takes me this long, just so you know when to kind of, maybe back out of a question, maybe try something new. That way you're not sitting there for 3-4 minutes wasting time. And then potentially you're losing points because you would have been fed some easier questions that you do get. Last thing, we already mentioned this, questions are weighted based on difficulty. And so wasting time on one that is really, really hard actually is not the best, because you could have time to do 2 that are pretty easy and just make up those points.
So we're going to talk about just some really basic tips and tricks. Some of these we've covered already, but just to emphasize them. So really be familiar with the calculator policy, what kind of calculator you have. I would strongly recommend making sure you have batteries that are charged if you're going to use a calculator that's not part of the Desmos system. There's nothing worse than your calculator that you're like, this is my calculator, I'm ready to go, is suddenly dead like 4 minutes into the test. So make sure that your calculator is charged and ready to go. Understand when to use it and when you don't need to use it. I've had students who are like putting 3 times 6 into their calculator just because they're so used to like calculator does the work for me. It's a tool. It's not doing the work for you. Practice makes perfect. This is a cliche, but it's true. You have to practice. You're not just going to show up on test day and, be the brilliant student who gets a 1600 on this test. You actually have to do the work beforehand. So this includes regular timed practice. Timed is very key there. A lot of students are like, well, I can get the questions right. But it's not about getting them right. It's about getting, all of them right in the time period. So some students, will only do short windows of practicing. You want to sit down and do like a full section and get used to that feeling and not feel overwhelmed, because it can get really grueling if you don't do that. It's like if you practice running a mile at a time and then suddenly you have to run 10 miles, you're going to get tired. So you want to make sure that you have that practice with the pacing and with the amount of questions you actually have to answer. It's also just going to help you see the different kinds of questions that pop up and identify, okay, I'm struggling with plane geometry. Like I don't remember how to do slope or something like that. Probably the most important thing that's non-academic, that is just personal management, is your mindset and stress management. So you want to stay positive. You want to have stress management techniques that you can rely on. There are different ones for everyone, but deep breathing is a good one. Visualization of yourself, getting the answer right, finishing, getting a good score. To stay calm and focused. There's nothing worse that can happen to you than to get in there, see the first question, start panicking, forget everything you learned. And remember, we've talked about this. No one's going to get every question right. Almost nobody. Maybe one person in the country will get every single question right. But you don't even need to get every question right to get a perfect score usually. And you're going to be able to take the test again. So for those of you that are taking your driver's test, I'd say it's more that level of stress you should feel, where it's important. It's something you want to take seriously. But if you fail, this isn't a school final where that's it, you're done. You get to take it again, most likely. So don't be too hard on yourself. do your best and just don't be afraid to guess or move on if you don't understand a question. And then the last thing, this is something we talked about. You should answer every question as you take it. You can, I think in the digital SAT, you can flag questions to come back to, but you don't want to leave answers blank, because if you run out of time, the time's ticking and you're like, oh man, I've left 6 blank from the section. You're scrambling just to get an answer in, versus if you make your best guess and then just move on. And if you happen to run out of time and you space out, that clock expires, you have something in there, versus if you leave it blank, that's a 0 for sure. So just put something, flag it, and come back.
Love.
So throw it out there. Yeah, for Q&A.
Let's go. Q&A. Okay. Thank you both very much. You're both fantastic and extremely knowledgeable, and I know our audience is getting a ton of value out of this. So let's go with questions. Somebody said, hi, you said data analysis concepts will be asked in digital ACT and was never before in traditional SAT. How do students prepare for this? Are there any free resources available to learn this data analysis? We do have some free resources available on our website. Just have to plug ourselves in there for a moment, but I will also hand this over to our wonderful panelists to see how do they recommend that students prepare for this?
Yeah, I always, as a teacher, would swear by Khan Academy. That is, I think, that just hands down the best free resource, and they do a really good job. I cannot speak as much to the digital SAT prep because it is just so new. I did have a significant amount of experience kind of going through all of that with my students for the paper and pencil SAT, and looking through this, it looks very, very similar. So it spits out quizzes and tests you can take at the end of each unit. There's videos about each kind of type of topic that might be covered. And so really, after you take some sort of diagnostic test, I'm pretty sure this is part of this, do not quote me on this, but if you take the diagnostic test, at least how it used to be is it will spit out, okay, you did great on this part, you need a little bit of work on this part. Here's the exact videos you can watch. Here's the exact practice questions you should do. And so it'll really kind of tailor it for your needs. It's an amazing starting point for a free resource for sure. And then, if you feel like you need a little bit more practice, I know that there are other resources out there, but honestly, I think that 80% of the average student's prep can be done with Khan Academy.
Yeah, I would firmly agree with that. Khan Academy, they are the partnered with the SAT at this point, so they have the right questions to prep. So I think that's a really good resource. If you're looking for something at your school, if you're a junior and you're deciding your senior schedule and you have an elective slot open, stats is a great class. If you're something, and it looks good for college too, to just have an extra math class in there. So don't be afraid to go the traditional route, but just specifically to prep, I think Khan Academy is the right answer to this question.
Fantastic. Okay. We have questions coming in. So, will the colleges consider super score from you digital and paper SAT taken before?
To my understanding, yes, but every college is different. Super score is not like a thing that is like the gold standard. Every college takes it. Every college scores differently. Some colleges have never super scored and still don't. Some will maybe only super score digital SAT, but I'd imagine any college that super scores will probably be able to combine digital and paper, because it's not like you're picking which one you think is easier. You're just kind of beholden to when they make that shift. So I think if your college super scored before, they probably are still going to super score combining paper and digital.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add to that, just kind of while we're loosely on the topic, is the SAT is making a resurgence. And so I just want to make sure that, y'all are here, so you obviously value it and understand that. I'm sure everybody here knows, post-COVID and the years following, a lot of schools, and I would say the majority of schools, lean towards either being, I don't want to see your test scores at all, don't send them, don't take it, or test optional, in which case, I won't get too far into the college counseling piece, but I will always encourage students to at least try it and take it because it can't hurt your application. Those times are quickly changing. We've seen a lot of the more elite schools in this past month or so announced that they're going back to making the SAT or ACT a requirement. I know that Dartmouth is one of them. That's my alma mater. And so that's definitely one that I'm sure of. Pretty sure MIT and Yale are on that list now. And so we're seeing this shift in, just the way that these schools are valuing these tests. And so it's very, very important to, once again, value this as a student and really make sure that you're putting your best foot forward, not thinking about it as a nice to have, but really a key component that colleges are looking for to say, okay, I trust that they will, do well with our curriculum or the rigor of our academics or whatever it may be.
Amazing. So actually, this is a good question. It's coming from a parent. What's the right time to take the SAT for the very first time? And I guess this parent's child, I shouldn't say child, is in 8th grade. So the student in question is 8th grade, and the parent would like to know if that's too early, or when is the good time to take this test for the very first time.
So every student's different. If your student's very advanced, you can take it earlier. Obviously, if someone needs more time to have those concepts from school, later is fine. I think we said earlier, typically spring of junior year is like the median, the average time that a student will take it for the first time. I would not have an 8th grader take the SAT. I think that is too early. I can't imagine you've made it through the full math curriculum to get that trig and algebra 2 for an 8th grader. And also the PSAT is a really good opportunity to do before that. So I wouldn't do it in 8th grade, but I think an advanced student could probably be doing it by the end of 10th grade. I think would probably be the earliest. And then if you're on the later end, fall of 12th grade is the last time you can take it.
Fantastic. So is it bad for colleges if we take the SAT more than 3 times?
Oh,
Dominique, you're
sorry. Not that I know of. I know that for sure there is no penalty for taking it more than once. 3 times is honestly kind of an arbitrary number. You can take it as many times as you want. You only need to send the scores for the tests that you are proud of, that you want to show. And so if a school does super score, awesome. You can pick the tests that you have your best math score and your best English and reading score for. If there's just one particular test date that you want to show, that's awesome. And so this is slightly different than some, I know some graduate school exams, you do have to kind of show everything and show your cards, and that's a little bit harder. But you will never be, one, you only have to send the scores again that you want to, but 2, you also just I think in the college admissions landscape, trying something twice to get it right and showing that initiative and just showing that you're able to work through that problem is almost always viewed super favorably. And so don't be afraid to fail and learn from it and get back up. That's really, I think highly valued in college admissions.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I think probably the bigger toll of taking it more than 3 times is just for your mental health and the psychic pain of having to take the SAT 4, 5, 6 times. So I think once you've taken it 3 times, you have to ask yourself, how much more can I improve? What am I going to do this time for the 4th time that I didn't do the first 3 times? Because you hit that point where you just can't improve that much more, where you're getting extra 20, 30 points, and you might be better spending that time doing an extracurricular, working on your actual schoolwork, and just doing things you actually enjoy versus trying to squeeze every ounce of blood out of that SAT score that you can get. So I think that's more of the problem versus colleges. You don't have to send all the scores. So if you really want every 2 months from sophomore year through senior year to just take the SAT, no one's going to stop you. But I just don't think that's the best use of your time.
Great points. So this is a strategy question. Does it make sense to do the fill-in questions before the multiple choice? So if you run out of time, you're more likely to do better guessing multiple choice?
I don't think so. Just do the ones you know. If you know how to do it, it doesn't really matter if it's a fill-in or multiple choice. And then pro tip, this is not going to work all the time, but I think it works at least some of the time. If you're going to guess a fill-in, 0, 1, and 2 are the most common fill-in answers. So pick one of those, and at least you have a better than 0% chance of getting it right.
Great. Okay, let's keep the questions coming in. I think I'm going to give our audience a few more minutes to sort of type in their questions, but I'd love to know from both of you sort of your number one piece of advice for students and parents alike going through this process, whether it's test-taking strategies, whether it's related to mental health and sort of that portion of it, whether it's the prep.
So I'd say for me, the biggest thing that people don't think about is like the physical component of showing up to take the test. Usually you have to get to there by like 7 a.m. In my experience, if you're doing an in-person test, which is way earlier than school starts, at least in California where I am. So a lot of kids show up tired. They've skipped breakfast because they're kind of in a rush. So you want to make sure that you physically prepare yourself the night before. You get a good night's sleep. You wake up, if you're a person who eats breakfast, you eat a nice breakfast, and that you like have your physical needs met, so that you're not like falling asleep, starving, can't focus on the test. So it's not all mental. There's the physical component as well.
I think for me, I've realized through my work, both as a teacher, both as someone who's taken the SAT and the ACT, and as someone who's worked as a private tutor and a college counselor, this is just such a deeply personal experience, and it is so different for each student. If you have the means, please do invest in a private tutor, even if it isn't, I'm going to meet with this tutor every single week for 2 straight years. I know that of course can be a financial burden in a lot of ways, but even if you have the means to book a consultation and like have someone work with you if you are a student, or with your student if you're a parent, to just talk through what makes you anxious, what makes you stressed, how did you do on the diagnostic, how did this feel to you when you timed yourself? Just all those little pieces, ask all those questions, and then come up again with a really personalized strategy. That question about the fill-in questions versus multiple choice, I agree with Michael that there probably isn't necessarily any benefit to doing that. Like truly just do the ones and make sure that you're not spending too much time, et cetera, all those things we talked about. But if that's going to be for you like a total deal breaker and it's going to make you more confident to get those out of the way and not worry about them, then maybe that is what you decide on. Maybe that does help you mentally. It is such a mental game. And so it's like little things like that, or, every time I see this type of equation, I'm going to use my calculator for it, or I'm not going to use my calculator for it. It's those little things. And so having that person to just kind of help you distill down what makes you tick and what makes you confident can really, really help. So that's, if you can swing it, or even just work with a peer tutor, whatever it may be, it's definitely, I think, beneficial.
Thank you both. So this is an interesting question. So how early before the SAT should a student start doing practice?
Again, I think it's highly variable. This is just me. I usually will encourage my students the summer after their 9th grade year to at least take some sort of diagnostic test. Ideally SAT and ACT. Sometimes students will get like the PSAT, practice SAT 9 or 10 in school. And that's kind of like a leveled test that can help you benchmark where you are as far as where you are kind of relative in your high school career. But, you probably won't be prepared. Most students aren't summer after their 9th grade year, but this is truly just to get a feel, did I like one versus the other? Did I like the science section on the ACT? Did I prefer that the math was super straightforward, but sometimes a little bit harder on the ACT? Or did I like that the math was a little bit more manageable, but it was more of a kind of a reading focused, comprehension focused test, right? So just getting a feel, not even necessarily for the actual content itself, but just the structure and what everything looks like can be super valuable. And then almost start from there, right? Let's pick a test. Let's start to do some light practice with the things that I've already learned. And then, again, working with a tutor is awesome, but getting some sort of a sense of where you're going, I would say starts summer after 9th grade, kind of early 10th grade.
Yeah, and I think part of that question was someone taking the test on June 1st. I would start now. Like you're 10 weeks out at this point. There's no reason not to be at least taking a practice test to see what you need to work on before you take the test.
And we have some awesome resources that I actually plugged in the chat for everybody. Some practice questions, as well as some study schedules you could potentially use. The study schedules are between 1 and 6 months. So I hope you find those of value. So this is an interesting question. It has to do with whether the digital SAT is harder than the paper SAT. Somebody's asking, it's a 3-part question, how well students did their first digital test taken in March, and sort of any thoughts you know from students who took digital. So have you guys had any experiences yet with students who've taken the digital?
I haven't. I think the first administration was like 3 days ago. So even if we had, there's no way to know because students, unfortunately, are not the best gauge of like difficulty corresponding to scores. Like sometimes students think something's really hard, but do amazing compared to what they would have done on the other one. So I think it might be too early to say.
So we have a few moments left. I'll give our audience a moment to put in any of their last thoughts. In the meantime, wonderful panelists, is there anything you think we've missed or that you'd like to add on? I know I put you guys on the spot here. So it doesn't look like there's any more questions from our audience. So I think it's okay if we wrap this up. Michael, Dominique, thank you very much for being a part of this. Thank you for your wonderful insights. Thank you for your engagement, and thank you to our audience as well for making this possible. We hope that you got a ton of value, and please don't hesitate to reach out, whether that's booking a free consultation, whether that's reaching out on social media, giving us a call, or even reaching out to our panelists as well. Thank you very much, folks. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and take care.